get started this evening. Thanks everyone for joining this evening. My name is Steve Sinkula and I'm the CEO of AgriSecure. Before we get into the agenda, I just wanted to share a few things kind of from a logistics perspective. Throughout the webinar, we've put everyone on mute. We've had some challenges with background noise in the past, so we found this is the best way to avoid that issue. However, we do want to engage you and get your questions and observations throughout the webinar. So there's two ways you can do that. You can use the Q&A function or you can use the chat function. I will be doing my best to watch those throughout. If we don't answer your question or bring up your observation immediately, don't worry. I might just be holding back until a later section when we might be addressing that topic more directly, or we'll come back to it at the end during a Q&A section. The other thing to note is that this webinar is being recorded, so we'll share a link with you sometime in the next few days if it's something that you want to go back and revisit later, or just are not in a position to take notes that you might want to. In terms of agenda, oops, sorry, we don't have the typical agenda. What we're going to be talking through tonight is organic returns. And really at AgriSecure, one of the things we've found is that building the right rotation for your organic farm and focusing on a long-term rotation are absolutely fundamental to achieving a successful long-term operation, both in terms of returns as well as a number of different dimensions, which Bryce will be talking about. This comes through our observation on our founders' farms and our experience with our members. And to be clear, we don't have all the answers, and we don't have a silver bullet. What we thought was really important to have this discussion and to share some of the insights we've been able to garner about some of the fundamental pieces that organic farming operations or those thinking about getting into organic should be considering and thinking through carefully. And then throughout, we'll touch upon some of the challenges in taking thought and putting it into action, which is where AgriSecure, I think, really can deliver a lot of value to our members and to people who want to become members of AgriSecure, and helping take these thoughts and not only have them be something that resides in a plan, but also takes action in a field. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bryce ALFALFA. Bryce, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Steve. Bryce ALFALFA here, founder of AgriSecure and founder of B&B ALFALFA Farms. As you can see on the right there, there's me and my dad in a cover crop field that was planted in late July, and that's probably October, late August. We began our organic efforts in 2015. And it was really an opportunity for me to figure out how to get back to the farm, which ended up into another business called AgriSecure, but really came as opportunistic after I was able to visit some organic farms and think through the economics and how that could impact our farms. And from 2012, when picking a day, we started and went from about 800 acres to about 4,000 acres in 19, and possibly growing after that. So learned a lot during the process. I think I keep in track. I'm probably well over $2 million of mistakes that we've accumulated. Still profitable, but again, built AgriSecure from our learnings and the processes and systems that we needed to be successful. So just we reflected a little bit on the keys that we were successful at. And the four things that we thought about was farm planning, develop a long-term plan for crop rotation. When I first started organic, this was not at the top of my mind. I didn't understand how important crop rotation was. And then the labor, equipment, and risk management, I thought it was just farming conventional. We grow the crop, we sell the crop. But there's a lot more that comes into this that impacts the outcome of your success 3 years prior to when you're planting that crop. Planting cover crops, nitrogen, having your management, risk management, APHs built up, or if you're growing a new crop, starting that 3 years before you're going to grow it. So farm planning, and I recommend, and AgriSecure recommends doing it 3 to 10 years out. 3 is the minimum. 10 years is more realistic to understand where you're headed. Focus on your strengths, leverage your operational strengths, and engage the others to fill those gaps. I can promise you, you can't do it all in an organic farm that's at scale. There's just so much that has to go on that we really sat back and thought about our strengths. I graduated Iowa State with an agronomy degree. That doesn't make me an expert, but I thought that was one of my strengths when we started into this endeavor, crop innovation. So I was not a corn and soybean person. I kind of despise that in a way because it doesn't challenge the agronomy knowledge to raise different crops and rotations that benefit each other. So I really like the agronomy side. My dad is very good at equipment and repairs and modification. Anything that we need to purchase or make, we can do. Understanding risk management was something that we took on. We're not crop insurance agents, but we really understood what that meant. The needs that growing how we did was one of the big things was record keeping. It seems like an easy task and people can tell you, oh, it's just a few invoices and things here, but to do it right, not feel behind and utilize it to be an asset to your operation, doing it ahead of time, keeping track of good records, making them digital, accessible, can be the difference between a successful and non-successful year in organic farming. Long-term rotation planning, so understanding, and this is what AgriSecure brought to our operation, understanding what other people have done, how they utilize different rotations, what challenges that they have come across. We don't have to make all those mistakes again. And so being able to have that knowledge and data to understand what long-term rotations do for organic farm is important. Input on best practices and innovations. Again, that's the same type, having that network really helped out and bringing that innovation to it. And then crop marketing. In organic, it's really a black hole for marketing. The people buying your grain, and yes, they are trying to buy it at the lowest price and resell it at the highest price. That's capitalism works. Nothing wrong with that, but they have a lot more information and knowledge than you do as farmers and producers. So how do we bring that information and knowledge to a group of people that one person can't possibly put together? And so really understanding our strengths, leveraging the network. And the last thing that keeps to success, keep it simple. If 3 years of alfalfa, 1 year of corn can be done in your area, it's probably the most profitable venture to get started with, and then add in complexity as you go. So with that, one of the things that as I see traveling across the country, working with growers all over the states, is long-term rotations make or break the organic success rate. And having this long-term rotation thought out before you go into transition is vitally important. To understand how everything impacts each other is vitally important. It really sets you up to be successful. So we have to rethink from when I started organic. Corn was still $12, $13, $14. Now it's at $7. And it's doing what markets do. It brings it closer to the break even. That's how markets work. So either we learn how to get better, and we learn how to use data, information, knowledge, and expertise and experience to get better, or we can sit there and say the price should be higher, which hasn't worked in the history of farming. So our option is to get better, top-notch planning and execution. And with that, again, when I started, I made a ton of mistakes. Stupid mistakes, the ones I would have had no idea about. And back then, okay was just, it was okay. And now with the tightened margins and there's still ability to make good money and be viable, but you can't make all the mistakes that I made during the way. And just okay is not okay. So it requires that thoughtful planning, the high execution. The difference of missing a rotary hoe because you weren't ready 2 to 3 days down the road can be the difference between a loss of 20 and 30 bushel corn through the end of the season. So execution is very powerful. And then have a systems-based approach. I think running it or working with a bunch of organic growers that we do, that systems-based approach. So it's not something that you're guessing at every year. Every year we order our chicken manure for the next year in June. We put it on the fields. We have a system-based approach to get that. It saves us a lot of money. We know where we're going to go with corn. We know where crops are going to go. It's not the most complex operation for cropping systems, but we have a plan and we have a systems-based approach that it changes a little each year. Don't get me wrong; it's not set in stone, but very important to get to that as close as possible as you can. How we think about this long-term rotation, and I've done this slide probably about 30 times now, and it's one of the best slides that we put together to understand where we started in transition. And it's okay to start there. Is we were driven by economics. That was the biggest wheel. Uh, what kind of rotation does my investment take and provide in long-term returns? Um, we had to do that to get through transition, and then it changed to management. Was the second 2 to 3 years down the road. Figuring out how to manage everything became more important to do it right and put the economics second. And third, on our last iteration of how we make decisions, that agronomic comes first. And so we're looking at that change from that short-term view to that long-term view of what's sustainable. It might not necessarily be the most profitable cropping system in 2021, but with the data and information we have, it's the most profitable cropping system for us 21 through 2030 with the information that we have. And so these wheels will change as you go through organic transition, organic production, and just understanding how they change and that it's understanding why you're making those changes is very important. So the right rotation builds resilience, and the foundation of success in organic is continuously refining the rotation that you first developed. I can tell you we've changed rotations probably 10 to 15 times at B&B ALFALFA Farms. We're getting closer, I hope, I think, and we stuck with the rotation that we had last year. We're moving forward, but you will change. You're continuously learning, but getting to that place that works in the long term is important. And the things that rotation needs to support is weed management being number one, mitigate potential weed issues, and allow for the cleanup issues. In a corn-soybean rotation, that is just corn, soybeans. If you have one rainy year in May and those weeds get started, one weed turns into 10, that turns into 1,000, that turns into 1,000,000, that turns into 100 million in 5 years. And it'd be interesting to do the statistics, but how often does an organic farmer come in and get out? What is that time lapse? From my knowledge and what I've seen, it's about 5 years. So having that rotation that allows you to have mistakes is important because we can't control the weather. Things happen, but understanding, we go back to 3 years of alfalfa every 6 years, and we clean up weeds. We reset that field. Then understanding a big one is fertility, reduce the cost of fertility by leveraging the rotations. Sometimes we plant corn after alfalfa, putting 125 pounds of nitrogen into the soil with alfalfa. My nitrogen cost is about $1 per pound. So we save about $125 doing that rotation. And then looking at no-till soybeans where we can get rye planted in September, those type of things reduce the cost of production. And then balancing NP and K ratios by leveraging biology. I see quite a few organic farms that over apply manure to get the nitrogen they need for 240 bushel corn, but they over apply P and K. And if you're not in a good rotation to draw that P and K levels down, you can throw your balance of your soil, balance of the soil out and cause real harm to the yields. As well as weeds love out of balance soil. So things to think about when developing this rotation. We build out our 6-year rotation. We have our input of NP and K and our output of NP and K during those 6 years. We try to balance that as best as we can. Then supporting microbial growth to mobilize fertility. It falls into the next bucket of soil health. A lot of people talk about soil health, and conventionally it's hard for me to understand the returns of soil health, but understanding in organic has been a lot easier. So healthy soil in organic is much easier to manage. Aerated, well aerated soil that's high in calcium, that has a lot of biological activity, is you can just pick it out of a healthier crop and organic, and not as many weeds and all that above. It really helps with growing different crops, having different cover crops, having that rotation, not over applying NP and K. It's really basic. It doesn't take you to apply some biological to make soil health there. Biologicals can work, they're good, but it's really that long-term view that you start seeing the success in soil health and bringing that in onto your farm. Support the microbial soil communities to partner with plants and crowd out the detrimental microbes. And that's just, if you go corn on corn, you're going to support growing microbes that don't support corn on corn, as we know that corn on corn has much more disease and insect pressure and all that type of stuff. And so how you put your rotation together really matters in all three of these buckets. The right rotation supports success. So balanced rotation that requires different field activities during different growing times of the season. And for instance, on our farm, we have our combine running in end of June, July. And if we do oats during transition, we're running almost into August and take a break, and we're running it again into October, November. And so we're spreading out of our equipment costs. We're actually lowering our size of our equipment because we don't need as big equipment. We're not doing all our planting in April. We're not doing all of our harvesting in October. We're spreading that out throughout the whole year. So understand how that affects your equipment usage, and then how you build that rotation. I've seen many mistakes made where people will have 500 acres of alfalfa this year, 0 next year. It's all over the board. And if you're buying equipment to try to match all that, you're in an uphill battle trying to justify the cost of that equipment if you're doing it correctly. And so understanding the repeatability of agronomy execution, and it can be modified if economics arise. For us, we might do no-till soybeans after alfalfa, take the alfalfa in the fall, plant rye, plant soybeans. If corn's at $6 and soybeans are at $21, we'll switch up the rotation. But we understand the impact of what that's going to do, and we understand when we have to make that decision by next year, and that's July 1st of 2021. That's when we start getting manure in and guaranteeing we have manure and get a lower cost on it. And so understanding when to make those decisions, why you're making them, how you're making them, all factor into the right rotation. So the execution, organic rotations require insight into potential bottlenecks. One of the things understanding, this is, I think, 1,000-acre farm. It might be 800 acres that we took out. It's a demo farm that we created on our site. And we are crossing that 6,000 acres. So it implements crossing it on 6,000 acres down there in the right-hand corner. As you grow, and even starting out, understanding when this workload is going to hit, as we talked about earlier, missing a window of rotary hoeing can cost you 20, 30 bushels pretty easily that you don't get ahead of the weeds. And that's $7, $6 corn, that's 130 bushels, $210. So it's very important to understand how to execute, where the pinch points are, and if you fail during a year, understand where you failed and how to correct it.
And Bryce, do you want to just touch upon how you look at on your farm weather data and how you bring in farmable days into looking at a month, especially like May in this example?
Yes, thank you, Steve. So we make decisions, and when I started farming with my dad, it was all in his head, which is great. He's really smart. He's got a lot of experience. And how do we take that from experience, put it into something like this, and then understand using data if it's going to work or not? So one thing we did at AgriSecure with FBN as a partner, they pulled all the weather data across the United States, and we have it per county, the min, the max, and the average working days per month throughout the summer. And Carroll County, Iowa, I believe the average is, I'd have to look it up, so this is going to be close, but we have 5 to 8 working days average in May to be on the field. And the low is between 2 and 3 days, and the high is in that 10 to 12 days. And so how do we make plans using that data? That I think it's over 10 years they have data on average working days per county, that if you ask your working with AgriSecure, we can provide that data to you to understand what your county, how many average working days your county might have. And then we can use that to understand, we have 1,045 acres to rotary hoe. I better be able to get that done in 2 to 3 days, but then I have to cultivate in May too. So putting all those numbers together and understanding if you're even practical or not. And when you're in conventional, it's a little bit easier to run a 120-foot sprayer boom at 7 miles an hour. And that's solid math. We know how to do that. When we're doing all this other work that we haven't done before, it's a little bit harder.
Thanks, Bryce.
And so AgriSecure, my farm platform, this is what we built off the farms that started AgriSecure. It's a platform to help capture all this data that you need for certification and create a plan around that. So building out each field plan year 1 through year 5, using that to provide certification output and plan that, and then provide the executability on that, both through finding nutrients to agronomy, to crop growth, to average production. And then the platform allows you to track all of that that's going on. And then the fourth part is what happened. Did it work? Did it not work? An example, we work with a fairly large grower. All the data was in. They didn't have the crop yields they wanted. Just looking through the data, their average rotary hoe was 8 days after they planted. That just doesn't work. That was their main issue they had on the farm. They weren't getting across rotary hoeing fast enough. And we had that discussion, and that's a huge change that they can make next year. So number 1, be able to plan. Number 2, execute. 3, track it. And then understand what went wrong or what went right, and provide the certified or certification with that. So one of the big things is we work with growers. Economic success isn't just corn. In the traditional, when we started and even today, we'll do corn the first year, and then we'll do corn on corn to pay the bills, get ahead and have money in our pocket. And it rarely works out to do that, especially this year was one of them. The corn on corn this year was 60, 80, 90 bushels below not corn on corn. And so you need to be set up for that success right off the bat, and understand that the 5-year profitability trumps 2 years of profitability of corn on corn in most cases, not every case, but that's what we need to bring data and information into to understand that on your farm, putting in your cost, your rotation. If you have a $200 to $300 manure cost, there's a high likelihood corn on corn is not more profitable than a long-term rotation. If you have zero manure cost, it's a different story. But what we've found in most situations is a long-term rotation has more viability economically than a short-term rotation. So if we look at that corn on corn model that we have there, not the green color, the orange color, corn heavy rotation, we can see that the returns start to go down. In balanced rotation, where we have some down years, but we still have some good years in there too to balance that out. And corn on corn, it provides weeds, it provides more need for nitrogen, more input cost, more rotary hoeing, more timeliness, less forgiving. So we're not saying corn on corn isn't possible. We're just saying the data is showing that don't plug in 160 bushel organic corn on corn in most places. From this year, 100 bushel would be lucky if we did an average pull. So thinking about that, it's not a one size fits all, but it's a thought process that you have to go through.
And I just want to take a quick break and here and encourage any questions you have. Feel free to use the Q&A or the chat function. We hope that your questions will, and we're here to answer your questions. So if there are questions, please jump in and let us know.
So
You can keep
economics
going,
and
Bryce.
oh, did we have one, Steve?
No, I said just keep going, Bryce.
All right. Plan rotations at a farm level. So at the field level, organic rotations will encounter significant revenue and income variability. For this year, I know this is one of the questions we'll hit a little later when Steve brings up questions, but I raised organic peas and organic canola, and I can tell you it was okay to a failure. We did about 30 bushel peas and about 2 bushel canola on $400 rent ground, and it doesn't work. It didn't work. You know, we lost quite a bit of money on that, but a conventional farmer I was talking to across the road, he said, "Are you worried?" I said, "No, this is part of the rotation. Uh, this is, you know, yeah, I would love to have made money on this, but this is something I had to do in my long-term rotation. My farm economics still look pretty darn good with the amount of corn that we have, the alfalfa, and the other parts of it. It is really hard for him to grasp that we could lose the amount of money we did on that section of ground and not worry about it. It's not that you know, we're throwing money around left and right. It's part of that rotation. That corn is going to that ground's going to corn next year, and having peas and canola on it and a huge cover crop, I have a highly likelihood chance of being successful corn with a minimal amount of inputs and better weed control. So if we look at this chart here, this is how we run our transition. Year one's transition alfalfa, a good oat yield and a good straw market and decent alfalfa market. We can break even, but we don't want to portray that to everybody. A good loss figure is $150 to $250 in there, unless you sit in a certain area that has different attributes for alfalfa and oats and those type of things. The second year conservatively will make $216 an acre on alfalfa. So all in all, our transition period, we figure a break even. Number one, we don't get weeds. We put nitrogen in the soil, and I really don't have to manage alfalfa. And so those are the three attributes that why we choose alfalfa. Then going forward, looking at the organic corn, soybean, organic wheat, organic corn, organic field peas, organic corn, allows for this is a decent rotation. I wouldn't say it's the best, but it's doable. It's very good. It's profitable. And this is high rent ground that we're talking about. So it's a long-term thought process.
Yeah, and one of the pieces here, if you look at it, you know, there is a significant degree of variability in income year over year, right? And that's at the field level, and I think that will lead into the next slide here.
Yep. So economics, consistent returns are supported by the right rotation again. If we look down here at the balanced rotation example, revenue, expenses, and gross margin, total revenue is 718,000. This is just a farm that from the slide 9 there. Total investment is $611,000. Gross margin $106,000. So will you have consistent revenue year over year, figuring in your cost? If you're jumping around equipment and size of acres of everything, find it very difficult again to be able to manage that and have cost efficiencies into it. And then high performers 1 year will likely balance out low performers. That's talking about that long-term view of growing peas and canola, not doing corn on corn. Yes, we lost some money there, but I have strong data to support backing up that we will make that up next year and even more. So.
Yeah. So, and again, you know, this really takes not getting caught up in just the field level view, but looking at the whole farm level and saying, all right, you know, if I have the right balanced rotation over time, I should be able to smooth out some of the key variables in terms of revenue, investment, and margin over time. Now, of course, there's going to be some variation, but as you model it out, you're going to take out those peaks and valleys, which also has some other benefits in terms of, you know, working with your banker and, you know, getting the access to the working capital you need, because it's fairly consistent year over year unless you continue to add acres into your rotation, and that would shift. Bryce, we got one question. It was, how do you get alfalfa seeded after corn?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I think that comes back to my earlier statement of corn or 3 years of alfalfa, 1 year of corn. So I'll answer that one, and then I'll answer what we do. It is I build out the rotation, 3 years of alfalfa, 1 year of corn. Then I'd come back in and plant oats and alfalfa as a nurse crop with alfalfa in the spring. It's not the best way to do it, but it works. We've done it quite a few times. How we do it and thinking about a longer term rotation is 3 years of alfalfa. If soybeans are higher, we'll go to soybeans. No-till soybeans, what we'll try, and then go into organic corn, and then go to a small grain, and then fall seed alfalfa. So we always try to fall seed alfalfa if we can. In organic, it works much. In organic, there's a higher chance of success fall seeding alfalfa because you're not going to compete with the grass early in the spring. You're not going to compete as much in the weeds. So whenever we can, we try to fall seed alfalfa. And that's planning ahead to have a small grain in there to do that. And it's something as you get farther down the rotation organic, it gets more of a necessity. So,
thanks, Bryce.
So, if we look at the rotations of corn, soybeans, wheat, and this is not even the minimum you have to do for organic certification. You can do corn, soybeans, wheat, and that will satisfy a lot of minimums. But if we look at this and having a small grain every third year, putting a cover crop in, what we're seeing is year over year, you're going to start to see a declining return. And now, granted, I want to be transparent. You might hit a year like this year in the perfect spot where it didn't rain all May and June came and you got some rain, not in Western Iowa. We didn't get any. But June, July come, August come, you've canopied, you get good rains. Everything works out that year. Or you could have a 2017 or 18 and it rained all May, all June, and you had 2 to 3 working days and you have a weed patch. Not that it's going to affect you much that year, but it's going to keep building on it. And that's where we're seeing that decline year over year. You see a decline of revenue in a rotation where you don't allow for mistakes. And this rotation is the bare minimum to allow for mistakes. And so we think through that. The disadvantages of rotation like this is weed suppression will become more difficult over time, increased amounts of tillage, the advantages of breaking the crop cycle, getting a cover crop in, and wheat provides that opportunity for strong cover crops. So it's not a bad rotation, but it's still long term. The viability gets hard with it. So next one, Steve. And so we look at different ways to put rotations together: corn, barley, soybeans. So this is a little bit different. This would allow me to do no-till soybeans, reduce some costs, really focus on the corn to do cultivating. It manages the risk a little bit more. Now we have a little bit more risk barley after corn, but that allows me to get my rye in early in September for soybeans to do no-till soybeans. Long term, the disadvantages, this is the same. Weed suppression will get difficult. You're not having a chance to reset that soil or the weed pressure. Soybeans will most likely require walkers or a weed zapper to manage weeds in the no-till situation, even in the tillage situation, if you did it. And the disease pressure with barley after corn can be difficult. The advantages are the possibility of no-till, better work management load, and potential for large-scale acres in this, because you just took 2/3 of your acres and you put those at low management, and you have the 1/3 of corn that's going to take high management. Next one, Steve. So risk management, rotation, grain marketing. Again, we hit that rotation. The right rotation can mitigate the risk and optimize your crop insurance protection, but strong risk management strategy requires a solid grain marketing plan too and execution. So rotation helps manage the things that we talked about: weeds, disease, crop year, weather risk, execution risk, diversify, economic risk. Crop insurance rotations can help support the plan to build up APHs. So when thinking about going organic or transition, how do we build up APHs on certain parcels of ground, certain counties, certain sections? How do we build up for crops that we haven't raised before? Alfalfa, peas, wheat, oats, rye, pretty much anything in Iowa besides corn and soybeans. How do we do that? How do we document it so when we go find insurance and mitigate our risk with those crops, we have an opportunity to do so? Then how do we protect the farm if we're doing risky things, such as with whole farm insurance? There's some risk management stuff through the FSA. For us to sit here and say organic is not risky, it wouldn't be right of us. It is risky. It has its risk, but it also has the ways to risk mitigate. It's not as easy as taking multi-parallel out in corn and soybeans every year and deciding if you're going to do 85 or 80%. There's a lot more to it. So understanding that what it takes to do that, and understanding a good crop insurance agent isn't somebody that has heard about organic. They've done it for 5 to 10, probably more years than that. So be very careful on that. There's good ways to mitigate risk, and there's really bad ways to do it too. Grain marketing, the current market requires building a marketing plan and update that data upon the data that we have. Sorry, build the marketing plan upon the data. And you do it in conventional, it's even more important in organic because there's not all that knowledge there. And so understanding local and regional opportunities. If you're in Iowa or Nebraska, what's the price of corn in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana? What is it down at the Gulf? Where is it being imported from? That's all knowledge that we as farmers can't do alone. That our network can help give that to you and allow you to make decisions on the most information possible. And you still have to make forward sales to reduce risk. A lot of farmers are very, very, very good or large scale conventional farmers plant their first year of organic corn, put it in a bin, and say, now where do we sell it? And and they're the most diligent people of selling conventional corn, and very good marketers, and the whole mindset changes. And so how do we make forward sales to start putting those prices on? There's not a board. We're not going to give you a board price, but you can make forward sales to reduce risk and being disciplined, knowing how to write contracts, knowing which contracts to go ahead with, and what risk you're taking on in those contracts is very important. So grain marketing, as we go back to that first slide, grain marketing and all this stuff, it takes a team of well-informed people, not just AgriSecure on all this. There's some things that we recommend other people for because we can't possibly understand or have information or knowledge on all of it. And at our farm, we hire other people to do it. And again, it goes back to just okay is not okay. You have to be good at all these. When I started, I didn't have to be good at any of them. I could just grow corn, and most likely I was going to raise a yield that paid my bills. So saying all these things have to come together to make a successful organic farm. Next one, Steve.
So before we get into the rotation examples, Bryce, from your farm, we did get one question. They realize that you might not have livestock in your rotation right now, but are we seeing much grazing of cover crops between cash crops? And if so, is that boosting revenue?
So we don't. I have 20. Well, I don't have 20 cows. My dad has 20 cows, and they take more time than 500 acres of organic corn. I tell them. So we have cows, but it's not anything that is part of the rotation. Grazing, and it goes back to, we tore an old pasture out about 12 years ago, 15 years ago. And that pasture is the highest yielding place on our farm, and it has been every year for 15 years. And so that's where my grazing knowledge not grazing knowledge, but interest in grazing came about. I think animals, grazing, roots, manure, different species of cover crops, all that's very good for the ground soil rotation, everything we talked about today. All that's very good, and it'll benefit you. The second part of that question, Steve, is this how you're going to boost revenue, will this boost revenue? And I cannot make the numbers work out in Iowa, and I've seen a lot of other people fail at it too. Is if I put cows out there to graze, and it's reasonable to think you can produce 10, 12 tons of wet matter forage, which comes out to 5, 6 tons of dry matter somewhere in there. The cow's going to pass through, and the real hiccup is they trample about 4.8 to 5.5 tons of that. And on a wet year, dry year, it's less, obviously, back and forth. But you just can't get the output in Iowa out of the forage into the cow into the meat and pay for all the cost in that process if you have any rain at all. We have guys that do it down in New Mexico, out in Colorado, very well because they don't have that trampling it all down, and it's good for the soil. But I can't figure out how to make money on that system. And then the second factor is I don't know cattle. I don't know how to market cattle. I don't know how to raise cattle at any scale whatsoever. And most Iowa farmers or Midwest farmers don't know how to do that. So if you can figure out how to do it profitably and you're good at cattle, can market cattle and do all that, I think it could be a win. But I haven't seen many people be successful at it at scale with the economics behind it.
Thanks. So should we move into the rotation examples?
Yep. So rotation example, Steve, you can just head on the next one. One thing that we talked about at our farm, we transitioned with oats and alfalfa. There's a farm near Madrid, Iowa that we rent. It's 143 acres. Silty loam, it came off of soybeans. We got it in 2019, and we put transition oats and alfalfa on it. The oats did about 73 bushels. Straw did about 1 ton, and we took about 1.5 ton of alfalfa off of it for the last cutting. So if we go to the next one, Steve. And you can see the pictures there of the oat harvest. Again, this was going back to planting. We had these oats sold down to southern Iowa, took them right off the field, moved them into the market. But oat harvest was good. It was about 2 weeks later. It was good yields. We take the straw off when we seed alfalfa. That straw will kill the alfalfa. So don't always like taking straw off, but a lot of times we do if we're seeding alfalfa there. And if we look at the budget here, and I need to make some changes to this, but if we see solid manure spreading, so we put manure on, drilling with alfalfa and oats, we dry spread calcium sulfate, we had a harvesting in there, so we figure on combine harvesting, and then we had the oats harvesting and the hay harvesting, crop insurance and organic paperwork. We had cost about $400, and our total revenue come in that $400 to $500. So our return to land on this was $60 an acre. And the next year, we're looking at that $315 an acre for the second year of alfalfa. And we're being conservative in those numbers.
So. The question came up into this one: are there better oat varieties or are there oat varieties that are better for direct harvest than others that need to be swathed?
So, this isn't data-driven answer or the end-all be-all. I think you'd want to swath all oats if you could. Now, don't go buy a swather because you have 40 acres of oats. But we've gone to swathing all of our oats for next year. It's a lot easier on our combine, flowing through dry oats on a lot of the wear and tear parts in our combine. Doing small grains, it's a lot harder than corn or soybeans running through. And so we're swathing all of our oats. But as far as your question goes, is there any varieties that are easier to swath than other ones? I don't have the answer on that. My answer is you want to look for a short stage variety that doesn't have as much straw on it, that puts more in the seed and less in the height. It's going to be easier running through your combine because you can get wet straw and it'll push through those concaves. And we had to actually tear apart our concave and push them out, and we had to redo the concaves in there. So that's why we're going to swathing, a lot easier on our equipment, and a lot easier to lay them down, get the sweat out of them, and pick them up and put them in a bin and put some air on them.
Thanks for the question, and Bryce, thanks.
So we do alfalfa. We understand alfalfa is not possible in every part of the country, but the pros for us are minimal risk, weed control, fertility by the alfalfa, and we're pretty comfortable with the numbers being break even to profitable. Cons are, when we got started, we had to buy a nice rake. We had to buy Actually, we hire all the baling and cutting out. But if you didn't do that, and even if you did do that, you're still going to have costs into that you normally wouldn't have at a time of the year. You normally wouldn't have those costs. Complex harvest logistics. If you like to be at the lake every weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, there's going to be some times you have to either manage the baling or to be out there doing it. So it's not just a 4 week a year job anymore, planting and harvesting and doing some spraying in between. It's a year round, or it's a whole summer job. Equipment investments can get pretty high to do it right, and markets are regionally based. So when we think about transition, alfalfa delivers a great foundation to be successful in organic, assuming you have the markets and can manage the production. Alfalfa can be grown most anywhere. You know, the flat, dark gumbo soils are a little bit harder, but it's a whole process behind why we grow alfalfa. Um, Organic alfalfa for us is a sustainable part of the long-term rotation for the weed management and the agronomic benefits. So walking through a year here, this is one of our fields that went through 2 years of transition alfalfa, 113-day corn planted June 1st, 2 years of transition alfalfa. We were really planning on we took, actually just go back a little bit. We took a cutting of alfalfa off before we planted it. That was 2.5 tons. So we took 200 to 300 dollars an acre of profit off of that, or revenue. And then we're shooting for 180 bushel corn. It's good ground, high fertility. It's some of the best ground we farm, so we felt comfortable with that. And we'll go through this season, but I'll be able to show you here. Next one, Steve. Here's that cornfield from a different view. It says it's planted the June 1st, not the 5th on there, but all we did was cultivate it once and rotary hoe it once. And our later planting, delayed planting, the 2 years of alfalfa, cutting the weeds out, just decreases our management significantly in there. And we'll go to the next page to show you how healthy it looks. But very good field of corn, good field of corn, and it did very well for the circumstances. That was August 10th. I think that was either the morning before or the day before the Dreco hit that took 10 to 20% of that corn out, as well as we were in the heart of the drought. I think 13 inches of rain is all that corn got. It is still averaged, I believe, around 170, 173 bushels of corn after 2.5 tons of alfalfa through to Dreco, through drought that was pretty close to 2012 around us, and had phenomenal weed control for one rotary hoe, one cultivation pass. But again, that was set up 3 years prior. The taking out the weeds, putting the alfalfa in, creating that soil biology with the alfalfa and the corn, and delaying the planting of corn all set us up to be successful on this field. So here's our field budget: organic paperwork, chicken manure. We did 3 tons. We did calcium sulfate, disking, field conditioning, planting, rotary hoe, cultivating, crop insurance, harvesting or hauling. Did about $450 an acre into it. 7 bushel corn. We still at 175. We put that in there for round numbers, but $1,300 of revenue. So return on land management is about $870 an acre. And we haven't added the alfalfa in there. And so we're in that $500 to $600 range of profit going through that system. And I know we don't have it in here, but we made money on that alfalfa field. Good years for alfalfa when we did them.
And Bryce, how did you terminate the alfalfa right in front of the corn?
Yeah, so we ran a big disc. We tried to run it about 3 to 3.5 inches down. I'm not sure we got that far down, but we ran a big disc, and then we ran a field cultivator below that to try to get the crowns. And we run overlapping sweeps by like 3.5, 4 inches on our field cultivator, so we make sure we get it. And we're going to, we will most likely have. It depends on the year, and this year is really good because it got hot and dry after this. The alfalfa really didn't come back, but to see 10% alfalfa come back in our fields is not highly unlikely, and we're okay with that. Corn's going to beat it up eventually, and the alfalfa is going to die. So we're not going for total termination where you have to have this black field with no alfalfa in it and only corn growing. It's not what we're shooting for. Things that I wouldn't do is a high speed disc. That seems to have been a failure a few times this year to me. And maybe it's just this year. Maybe somebody else has a different experience. I've just seen some failures this year with high speed disc. It doesn't. It's just like disking it. It splits the crowns, but you got to have that sweep come under there and cut them off. Sweep plows work. I wouldn't plow this late in the year. Uh, I don't like fall tillage, so those are the things that I've seen that work. Big sweep plow is one of the better ones too. So.
And then, are you using any fertilizer on the second year of alfalfa?
Yeah, so every acre every year in our farm gets 150 to 200 pounds of calcium sulfate. We do that. Calcium is the biggest molecule in the soil. It goes in the soil, it opens it up, it provides air and oxygen. Sulfur benefits nitrogen uptake, whether it's in corn or nutrient uptake in alfalfa. So I like calcium sulfate every year, every acre. Uh, Depending on price, we will do potassium sulfate on alfalfa, 200 to 300 pounds. This year, the chicken guys, I think their shit doesn't smell, and the price got way crazy, so we didn't do chicken manure. Otherwise, we'd usually do 2 tons of chicken manure on that alfalfa if the price is right. But we're probably switching to potassium sulfate this year as the chicken manure came up in price. So some things to think about when building a rotations. We know alfalfa can't be done everywhere. Is how do we decide the a good point. So the point was made when you do inputs. One thing we just like to put out there because we run into it and try to keep people out of it. When doing inputs like calcium sulfate, just make sure where you get it that it is approved organically. They don't have to sell it to you organic. There's not organic calcium sulfate, but there is companies that sell calcium sulfate that is approved organically. And make sure when you buy inputs, whether it's chicken manure, calcium sulfate, that it's approved either as an organic stamp or it's approved by your certifier. So not all calcium sulfate's organic, not all gypsum's organic, not all high cal or lime is organic. So good point, Pete. Thanks for bringing that up. We just want to make sure we don't lead anybody down the wrong path. One of the things that we want to bring to attention is how do we think about small grain field budgets and revenue? And we're not going to go deep into this because the point of the story is a lot of these budgets are the same, whether it's oats, barley, wheat, or rye. Each one changes a little bit, and the only thing that really changes is that seed cost in there. And so the variation isn't big. What is big is what works in your area: oats, barley, wheat, or rye. What's the market, and what's the chance of being successful? If I'm going to get $4 to $5 oats in Iowa, where I'm at, and get a 70-100 bushel yield, I just set up for failure. That 4 to 5 bushel yield takes 38-pound test weight, and I have a very slim chance of hitting that unless I have the absolute most perfect year. So thinking about that, if I don't hit that test weight, I probably don't have a market on organic oats. Conventional oats is different. So if you saw, I just want to make clear because people say, "Oh, you did oats on that alfalfa field." Those were transitional conventional oats, whole different market. This is organic small grains. Barley is something that 60 to 80 bushel every year for us to a feed grade market. 550 to 650 straw revenue. I can put a lot of faith into being able to do that. And the wheat 60 to 80, $7 to $11. Most people, if they put 60 bushel wheat at $7 in Iowa, that would be reasonable. 80 bushel wheat at $11 would be highly unreasonable in Iowa. The farther you go north, the farther you go west, drier, colder, you got a lot better chance. Rye for us, 50, 80 bushels is pretty reasonable. Bad at marketing into cover crops or feed, $6. If you're decent at marketing, $9. You got the cleaning facilities and the infrastructure. So you really have to, the moral of the story is think through the small grain rotation, understand the risk. Oats, barley, wheat, rye all have different risk factors that come into them, and understand what is reasonable behind them.
And I think the other important point with small grains is to understand how do they fit into your rotation, and then what are the other benefits a small grain can bring to your rotation besides just purely looking at the economics. I think that gets back to some of the things and how Bryce integrates small grains in his rotation. He's not doing it because of the economics that he's going to get out of that 1 year, but the other benefits it brings to the entire rotation in terms of agronomically, what are the benefits, and from an execution standpoint, what is the benefit of having a small grain in so that he can focus more on his corn acres and making sure he gets those right.
Thank you, Steve. That's perfect. That's exactly why we do it, and we actually don't harvest many small grains. If we plant a small grain, it's for a feed source to something else that will take before the small grain. So I see there's a question in there, Steve.
Yeah. So how do you use chicken manure on standing alfalfa since it has to be incorporated in 1 day?
So I'm guessing that the individual that asked this is living in a different state besides Iowa. In Iowa, there's no rules like that as far as I'm aware of. I could be totally wrong, so don't use that. Don't look it
Don't
up for
bet the
yourself.
farm on it.
Yeah. But I've seen millions and millions of chicken manure spread on top of the ground in the middle of in a snowstorm and sit there. Not saying that's right or wrong. I just it's not enforced or it's not a rule in Iowa. So putting it on top and not incorporating it in Iowa, at least it could change all around the country. I know. I think Minnesota has way different rules than we do. They can't even set it on the side of the field, where we don't even have a time frame where we can set it inside a field before we apply it. And I know some counties in Illinois, or you can only have it set on the field the day before you apply it, and such things like that. So for us, I believe we're following the rules. We don't have to incorporate it. And for chicken manure, incorporating it, if the question is more about losing fertility, my belief and what I've been taught and the science behind what I believe is you lose the fertility in chicken manure, specifically the nitrogen, about 2 seconds after you spread it on the ground, and you're always going to lose about 1 to 2 pounds of nitrogen per ton of chicken manure spread. Unless you're 2 to 5 seconds behind the spreader tilling it in, you're going to lose it anyway. That's what I've been taught. That's what I've learned. I'm not saying that's the only way to think about it. So those are 2 answers I can give to that.
Thank you.
So takeaways from what I've learned at B&B ALFALFA Farms and AgriSecure as a group, all of us together, planning out that rotation can be the difference between success and failure. And we talked to a lot of people in transition, and they have qualms about working with us during transition. They wanted to during organic because the money's flowing in from organic, and they can justify it more. Transition's hard, but failures can start at transition if you're not setting yourself up for the future into organic. I see it a lot of times, and if you're don't have that plan for organic, how do you even start to develop markets that you may need for alfalfa or small grains or those rotation crops if you don't have that plan for how you're going to be successful? So well thought out planned rotation is very important. Each region will differ in rotation, but the principle of breaking up disease and weed cycles applies to all areas. And then understanding the workload management, the capabilities, equipment, and critical to building and executing on a plan. And then the fourth bullet is risk management, first by rotation, but also by grain marketing, understanding insurance, and understanding your operation. So go ahead, Steve.
Go ahead, Bryce.
No, close it out.
So before we get to answering a few other questions, one, again, ask any questions you have. Bryce and I are available, so happy to get more questions from the audience. And then we did get a few questions in via email prior to the event, so we'll touch upon those as well. But before we do that, I just want to reiterate that AgriSecure is here and we're built to serve organic farmers. We really believe that we have 4 areas that we deliver a lot of expertise and are kind of pillars of our service offering, and that's organic expertise and innovation. So on the team, we have a lot of organic experience, and within the network, we're continuing to build out our view of what works and what doesn't work, but also working on what's next in organics, and so that's something we can deliver. As we've talked about, we really focus in on and have tools and expertise on the farm planning and execution, which are absolutely critical. And then we can basically take care of the certification issue for for our members by working through and managing the certification process, and then also support organic grain marketing from a very thoughtful approach to building out a plan and executing it in a way that both manages risk and tries to capture opportunities. If anyone is interested on the call in learning more about AgriSecure or talking to the account executive who works in their territory, you can reach out to the number or reach out to contact@agrisecure.com, and we'll make sure to get you in touch with them and get a call scheduled or a consultation scheduled as quickly as possible. Now to some of the questions, and the other plug is that if you want to get more updates on what we're putting into our YouTube, so we create videos throughout the growing season, and then we also have more webinars that we put onto our YouTube channel. If you want to have access to those and get updates on when they're loaded, just follow AgriSecure on YouTube, and it'll kind of keep you up to date as we put new content out there. So from questions, Bryce, there were 2 that are fairly similar. So, what are best practices for building rotations? I think we touched upon that quite a bit. But one was, what are successful rotations in my region? And unfortunately, I don't know the exact region, but I think more if you can speak to just conceptually, how do you understand what is the right rotation for a region?
Yeah, and that's put a difficult question, Steve, without a good answer. I think it takes a lot of time investment into understanding what markets are in your area. I think one thing that I've learned over the last 4 years is not every farm is good for organic. Not every area is good for organic. And definitely, just because you say I want my acres organic doesn't mean you're going to be set for it. You want to look at what does my area support, and I give this drastic answer is if I have 10,000 acres of corn, somebody wants to pay me $30 a bushel for, I'm going to raise 10,000 acres of $30 a bushel corn, and I'll figure out the rest to make it work. And that's, in our Manning region, where we're in Western Iowa, we farm in different regions as a family farm. Our local area is only going to support so many acres of alfalfa. Before, if we'd expand all right there, we would have way more alfalfa than the market's going to accept, and we'd probably just drive down our prices enough that why even farm those extra acres of alfalfa, because we'll make the same off of farming less. So understanding those markets, understanding if that rotation is viable to keep you in long term economically and both agronomically are important ways to look at it. So I can't sit here and say there's one rotation for each region. You could be out in Indiana sitting next to a 7,000 head dairy where you can do 3 years of alfalfa, 1 year of corn, and that's just as viable as sitting in Iowa with a beef lot that takes actually even more viable. But all that changes, and it takes learning, investment, time, understanding, and education to set that all up and be successful.
And I'd add in a few other things that, you mentioned. One, you have to make sure that you have the right ground. 2, you have to understand what markets there are that can fit into your rotation. Then I think 3, you go back to that initial slide where you look at how do I balance the economics, the agronomics, and the execution. And that execution is really understanding yourself and what you're good at and what you can manage and where you are in your organic journey. And so starting out with the basics is one thing that we always really try to emphasize at AgriSecure. And then as you get those down and you feel success that you've gotten those gotten very successful at the basics, then there's opportunities to try new things that could be beneficial for the rotation, but trying those at a scale that makes sense. So, entering in small scale on certain things and then building from there as you learn whether it's going to work or not for you. And that's something where, again, AgriSecure can come in and have a conversation. And one is we can bring knowledge to bear about what has worked and what hasn't worked in different regions, but also pressure test our clients' thinking. So it's really a collaborative relationship where they're pushing our thinking and we're pushing their thinking on what is possible and how do you balance the risk versus reward in different economic rotations or different organic rotations. Sorry. Bryce, there's a question about interested in learning more about interseeding two cash crops together, such as yellow peas and barley, or yellow field peas and barley.
Yeah, and we did canola and peas this year on 500 acres.
Oh. No, go ahead. No, I just want to make sure it wasn't canola in the question, but yeah, it is yellow field peas and spring barley. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just starting off with where we would. So we did 500 acres of canola and field peas this year. It wasn't a disaster, but it wasn't good. A lot of things went right, but a few things went wrong that drastically changed it. We have a lot of investment into it. When you talk about a grain cleaner, you're going to spend $10,000 to $20,000 on a grain cleaner to be able to clean it well enough, especially if you're doing peas, because you can't have that, we'll call it foreign material in there, but barley or canola. You're going to have a lot of time invested into it, meaning you have to be able to set up to handle two products, one going one place, one going the other place, and two bins, and have that clean and move. It's a lot of work in July heat. I know we did it all. We had trucks coming in and out, and the grain cleaner getting stuck. So a lot of work, a lot of investment. Grain cleaner. If you do that, you're going to have to own a swather and a pickup head. I would say 10 to 15% chance you can make it work without a swather and a pickup head. If everything goes perfect, you can direct cut it, but you're gonna have to own a swather and a pickup head to go with that. So I don't want to talk people out of it, but don't do what I did and do it at 500 acres. Do it at 10 acres where you can just bale it. It's not going to make a difference. We're going to try barley and field peas this year on a small scale. But at the end of the day, what I've come up with is just doing field peas alone might make the most sense if you're going to do field peas. If you're going to do barley, just do it alone. I'll give you a better answer after next year, see if it goes better than this year. So.
And real quick, any other questions before we get in? Please ask them now. Bryce, another question was crop inputs that we've experienced return on, so fungicide, foliars, elements.
Yeah, sulfur is a big one that I think we see a return year in and year out. And it goes back to the science that nitrogen is one of the most limiting factors in organic rotation. And then pest and disease are the second biggest factor. Sulfur, number one, helps nitrogen efficiency in the soil going up in the plant. And it makes complete proteins in the plant that makes it less desirable to insects, makes a healthier plant. So I'm a big believer in sulfur as an ROI. Calcium, I can't say, it's a direct ROI. It's something we believe in, we do it. It helps the soil. We think it provides more tillage, easy cultivation, those things. I can't say that we put calcium down alone and seen an ROI, but I believe long-term it has that effect. In fact, fungicides, insecticides, those type of things, hit and miss. I can't say that we've seen positive ROIs on those, and I don't have them in my plans next year. I think if we see something come up in the corn crop, we'll probably try something. But even then, I'm not 100% positive on that being beneficial. One of the things that I do think is important is a fungicide in small grains. We use Procytic. It provides an insurance because small grains are so susceptible to diseases that can make them virtually worth nothing. That the $10, $12 I spend an acre probably for my comfort level of growing these crops rather than an ROI, but it still makes me feel better on that. But as far as getting ROI off a lot of these products, it's hit and miss. And I don't want to say they're bad or good. I just want to say from our standpoint, we don't have enough data to understand yet if what the case is.
And then real quick, Ted, I see that you raised your hand. So if there's something you'd like to ask directly, you can unmute yourself and ask. My apologies if I didn't notice that earlier in the presentation. Okay, Ted, maybe we touched upon Ted's question earlier. So, but again, Ted, you have the ability to unmute yourself if you want to ask. Bryce, the last one was, and this is a big one, it was the future of organic farming. You want to take a shot on that? And I can add my thoughts on top of that.
Yeah, I can tell you it changes every day. I think what we're seeing an overall trend in society is where we came from was less value on food. So food was food, Burger King, whatever, it doesn't matter. Less value on food, and now we're trending to see people that really consider what they're eating, the impact to society. They want to understand. There's a group of people emerging that want to understand where their food comes from, what the impact has, what kind of quality is this food, and there's a whole line of questions we can ask. And organic seems to fill that void right now for that group of people. And one of the big things, if you go to a farmer's market, one of the things that I notice really doesn't matter if it's organic or conventional there. People, there's not organic this and conventional that, or however you want to market it. People have what they have, and people go there because they get to meet the person that grew it or think they grew it. They get to see, they get that experience, they get the understanding, they feel closer to their food. And I literally saw McDonald's wraps sold for like $4 or $5 for $1 wrap at one of these farmers markets, and people were lined up around the block to buy it. It's so it's not so much organic. It's not so much this word or that word. It's people feel they know what they're getting. There's something behind it. There's something about it that makes them feel good for buying this. And whether that's organic or regenerative or whatever the word is, I think what we're going to see more and more is third party verification. Uh, Farms that have processes and systems put together to be able to access these markets over not overnight, but in a fairly quickly manner. If it takes you 2 years to put it together, these companies will just pass you up as farms. That you're able to make these sideways moves into different things, whether it's organic, regenerative, or whatever the new thing is. It's going to require traceability. It's going to require third-party verification, and it's going to require good record keeping. So that's my view going forward, how we're positioning our farm. Whichever way that might take in the future, we'll be ready for it. So, Steve, I'll let you answer.
Thanks, Bryce. I think that was really well said. And the underlying beginning of what Bryce started out with is demand. And all projections are that demand for organic food is going to continue to grow at a rapid pace in the United States. And it'll likely do the same in other geographies as well. And that sets up an opportunity. And when you look at the millennials and the next generation, their preferences and the fact that they want to store, all of the data supports that. And that sets up a really interesting opportunity for farmers. And it's an opportunity for conventional and row crop farmers to diversify their operations, to meet the needs of consumers and the wants of consumers. And the way that AgriSecure looks at it, it's a few things. One, we think organic farms are going to have the opportunity to be profitable in the long term. Now there's going to be, storms or some volatility in the market, just like any other market going forward. But those operations that can do it at some sort of scale and build in efficiency into their system, focus on execution, and adopt innovation as it comes down the pipeline for organics are going to continue to be those top-notch producers that have an opportunity to be really successful. The big challenge is that, as Bryce mentioned, it requires a higher degree of execution, both in the field because of all the activities that you have to do and get right, but all of the traceability and the tracking that you need to get done. And those that are going to be able to manage both ends of that spectrum are going to be very successful. And we think that the future for organics is very bright. And if Bryce didn't, he wouldn't have literally bet the farm on it, as well as our other founders. And we think there's a lot of opportunity for more farmers in the United States to join in without destroying the market overall because of the underlying growth. So with that, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. Again, we're a resource that's here for those interested in organics, either be already organic and looking to take an operation to the next level, or looking to transition into organic. So please reach out and let us know how we can help you. Thank you very much, and I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday season. Thank you.